Hey guys, welcome to our last lecture on morphology. This is it, I promise. And then we have wrapped up morphology and we're going to move into basically the last unit of our semester. This section, let's review real quick. We've learned what morphology is. It's the creation of words. We've learned about affixes. That's an umbrella term for a prefix or a suffix. Morphemes, we've been investigating morphemes. Morphemes are either free or bound. A morpheme, by definition, is the smallest unit of meaning in a word, and these are either free morphemes, so they are morphemes that can sit alone as an entire word. They are the base of all the words. And then we have bound morphemes, which are affixes, which we attach to these free morphemes. And so we've already been looking at this some. This last lecture, you looked at the morpheme S as in plural, and it's a bound morpheme, right? It has to attach to another word. The interesting thing about this morpheme, this bound morpheme, is that when it attaches to a word, it always, meaning plural, right? When you're using the S to mean plural, you always attach it to a noun. So adding the suffix S does not change the word's parts of speech. So when we have a noun like cat and we add the suffix s, meaning plural, to it, cats is still a noun. However, we also discovered in the last lecture that some of these suffixes, when you add it to a word, it does change the part of speech. So we had the free morpheme agree, and like I agree, it's a verb, but I can add the bound morpheme meant to it. And what I found is that when I add the suffix meant to the word, it changes the part of speech. Agree was at first a verb, but then agreement is a noun. And so there's actually a term in linguistics, which is what we're going to discuss in this lecture, for the difference between these types of suffixes. Why do some suffixes, not just suffixes, prefixes too, why do some affixes change the word's parts of speech, but then others don't? And there is a term for this. When we're discussing bound morphemes, so these are all these little units of meaning that cannot stand alone as words. So like the plural S or the ment, as in agreement, those units can't stand by themselves, right? So they're bound morphemes. There's a difference between derivational morphemes and inflectional morphemes. And the difference is, as we just saw on the last screen, one significantly changes the part of speech or the meaning of the word, and the other one does not. So we're going to investigate those two categories of affixes in this lecture. When I'm talking about derivational affixes, so derivational morphemes, these are morphemes that when, these are bound morphemes that when I attach it to a word, there is a strong, significant change. So I'm going to use this little image right here for meaning strong change. The guy with he's strong, obviously, right? When I attach an inflectional morpheme, there's a weak, wimpy change to the word. So I'm going to use this little guide to indicate when I'm talking about inflectional morphemes. But what do I mean by change? That's the question, right? So I'm saying there's strong change and there's wimpy change, but what do I mean by change? Strong or when we are attaching bound morphemes to a word, there's usually a strong or wimpy change in meaning. So I have the word agree, and I attach the morpheme meant to it. And this changed the meaning of the word either in a strong way, in a significant way, or a really weak minor way. Let's look at the word believable. When I attach un to the word believable, both are still adjectives. So this didn't change the part of speech, but it did give a strong change to the meaning. Because if you think about the meaning of believable and the meaning of unbelievable, those are completely opposite meanings, okay? So this is considered a strong, significant change. By adding the morpheme un to the root word believe or believable, all of a sudden I have a really strong definition change. The meaning has changed significantly. As opposed to when we look at the word cat, if I add the morpheme, the plural S, to cat, It doesn't change the part of speech. Both are still nouns, just like in my last example. Believable and unbelievable are both still adjectives. But what I would call this a wimpy change, meaning the meaning of cat is still the same, even when I add the plural s. Cat still has the same definition. It's a wimpy change in meaning because with the s, I'm obviously adding a little more meaning. I'm adding that there's more than one cat, but the root words, the meaning of the root word is still the same, okay? Cat and cat still projects the same image in your head, okay? You're not completely changing the definition of what a cat is by adding that morpheme. So when I talk about change, I'm talking about two types of change. There's either a strong or wimpy change in meaning, and or there's a strong change in the word category. There's a change in the part of speech. So we use the example drive, which is a verb, and I add the morpheme ER to drive, and I get driver, which is a noun. That's a strong change. It's changed the part of speech. It went from a verb to a noun. So we consider that a strong change. So again, derivational morphemes are words that have strong, significant change. They can change the meaning of the word and or the part of the speech. Inflectional morphemes have a wimpy change. They don't change the part of speech, and they only might change the meaning of the word a little bit, but the main meaning is still there. I want to start with talking about derivational, this first word. Are strong ones. We've seen this word before. This is when there's a change in a meaning or word category. So derivation is the process of creating a new word by changing its meaning and or word category. And it doesn't always need to take a bound morpheme to happen. So we can use the word drink. I will drink some water. And in that sentence, drink is a verb. I could also say I need a drink, and in that sentence, drink is a noun. This is considered a derivational change because not only has the part of speech changed, it's gone from a verb to a noun, but the meaning has also changed. So in the first one with the verb drink, it's the action of drinking. In the second one with the noun drink, I mean the physical entity of like a soda or a water, right? So those are completely different definitions. This is an example of a strong, significant change, a derivation, and this is how we create new words in English. But in this lecture, we're primarily focusing on bound morphemes, so those little tiny units that we add to root words to the free morpheme to create other words. So let's take a look at what derivation means for that. Derivation, again, is the process of creating a new word by changing its meaning and or word category, so both can happen. We have the word sun, which is a noun, and I can add the bound morpheme, the suffix e to it to create the word sunny, and now I have an adjective. Sunny is considered a completely new word than sun. Those are not the same word. The definition is very different between defining the word sun and defining the word sunny. It's not just an altered form. Sunny is not just a slightly altered form of the word sun. It's a significant meaning change. It also changed the word category. Sun is a noun and sunny is an adjective. We saw this in our word agreement, right? Agree is a verb, but agreement is a noun. The definition of those two words is very different, and the word category also changed. So here's quick examples of how suffixes or affixes in general not only can change the word category of a word, but also change the meaning. I've used this definition that it's the process of creating a new word by changing its meaning and or word category. So just keep in mind the word category does not always have to change for it to be considered a strong, significant change, a derivational change, okay? Because let's look at the word order. So it's a verb, right? And then we can add the prefix re to that verb and we have reorder. And now it's still a verb. Reorder, though, is considered a completely new word. It has a different definition than order. To reorder or to order are different things, right? And they exist separately in the dictionary. If you were to Google define order, it would have its own definition. If you were to Google define reorder, it would have its own definition page because these are considered separate words. The thing I want to point out to you here is that the part of speech did not change. They are both still verbs. So just for it to be a derivation does not mean that it's going to go from a noun to a verb or jump parts of speech, but it does mean that it did create a whole different meaning for the word. It changed the meaning of the word. So this is an example of these strong, significant changes that we have in morphology when we use these affixes and prefixes, or prefixes and suffixes, okay? But as I said, there's strong, significant change like derivations, and then there are weak, wimpy changes, okay? So some of these suffixes that we use don't change the meaning and they don't change the part of speech. Inflection is created by adding forms to words. So what I want to say here is that, however, when we use these other morphemes I'm going to show you, the part of speech remains the same. The meaning of the word also goes through what I'm calling a wimpy change. To explore what I mean by inflectional, let's look at the word cat and cats, right? When we add an S onto cats to mean plural, the process doesn't change the lexical category of the word. We still have cat, noun, cats, noun. Okay, this is not a change at all. So I know it's not derivational because the part of speech didn't change. Let me see if the meaning has changed. I know that when I think of cat and cats, I'm still thinking of the same object, right? I might be thinking of more than one, but I'm still thinking of the same type of physical entity, right? So the meaning really hasn't changed. I do call this a wimpy change though, because when you add the plural S to cats, I'm making you think of more than one cat, which does change the meaning a little bit, right? Cat is one cat, cats is more than one. So there's a little bit of wimpy meaning change, but really the main meaning of what cat or cats is still there in the word. The words formed by this process, the inflectional process, are considered different forms of the same word rather than completely new words. When we looked at derivations just a second ago, those weren't different forms of the same word. Order and reorder are not different forms of the same word. They're considered two completely different words because the meaning of the words is significantly different. In English, inflectional morphemes are always suffixes. So prefixes, right, at the beginning of the word, if you ever see a prefix, that is not an inflectional morpheme. Okay, so there's a big hint for you right there. Inflectional morphemes are always suffixes. They're at the end of the word. If a word has a prefix, then it's always derivational. And when it's derivational, that means the meaning and or part of speech has changed. So if you ever see a word with a prefix, I'm telling you it's derivational. And if you look closely, either the meaning and or part of speech has changed for that word. And we saw that with the word order and reorder. However, not every suffix is an inflectional morpheme. Okay, there is a set list, and I'm going to show you that now. Here is a list of all the inflectional suffixes in English, and it's also a list of rules, so you need to read it carefully. These are all suffixes that can be added to specific categories of words, and it doesn't change the meaning of the word, or if it does, it's real wimpy, okay? And it does not change the part of speech. So notice how all of these are suffixes. Like I said, none of them are prefixes. And these are all considered inflectional. And they're wimpy, insignificant changes. So you can go through the list right here, and I'm going to teach you how to read it. So the first column is the function, third person, singular present. Okay. So the affix is the S, not the plural S. It's a different type of S. And it attaches to verbs. So such as he sings, okay? When you hear he sings, you're a speaker of the language. You don't think when I say he sings, you're thinking sings, oh, S, that must be the plural S. He's singing multiple times. No, you know that's not what that S indicates. But you do know that we would add that S after pronouns like he, she, or it, right? He sings, she sings, it sings. But I would not add it after. I could say I sing, they sing, we sing. But when I use specific third person, I add that S, okay? And it doesn't change the meaning of what sing is. It doesn't change the fact that sing is a verb. It's still a verb if I put sings. So there's no significant change, but yet it's required by some of our rules in English to add that S. The key here is that as you're reading this chart, you need to specifically focus on the third column in terms of what it can attach to. Okay, so if I jump down to the plural S, so that's item number 5, plural S. The plural S can only attach to nouns and still mean plural. And we looked at this in the last lecture when we looked at cat and cats and we looked at taco and tacos. The plural S can only attach to nouns. It can't attach to verbs or adjectives or adverbs. So here are a set list of all the inflectional suffixes in English. Again, when we're talking about inflectional, we're talking about wimpy suffixes that don't change the meaning of the word and don't change the part of speech. So there's one question we've yet to answer, and it was kind of a trick question, and that was this last question here. Why is hoping a verb but hope is a noun? And it is a trick question, but I'm using it just to illustrate a point about dictionaries. When you first Googled or whatever dictionary you used to define the word hope, the first definition you probably got was that it was a noun. So in your mind, you're thinking, well, if hope is a noun, and I add the ing to it and it becomes a verb, well, that's a derivational process, right? It changed from a noun to a verb. The reality is that's not what happened with that word. Hope is also a verb if you look at the second definition. We can use single words in English as multiple parts of speech depending on where we put it in the sentence. A lot of English words have that fluidness. The definition of hope as a noun is different than hope as a verb. So it's not necessary, it is the same word, but there are two different definitions for that word depending on where you use it in the sentence. And again, some of this is syntax related and we're going to get there after morphology. But I wanted to ask you this question or pose this question to the class just to illustrate that hoping is a verb, and it's an inflectional morphological process from the verb hope. So if you go back to our inflectional suffix page, you will see that we can add ing to verbs to change the progressive or to change the tense of the verb, right? They laugh or they are laughing. They hope, they are hoping. Okay, so that's the process that happened there. It was actually inflectional. It's not that we took a noun and created it to be a verb, hoping. Okay, that probably did happen at some point. Hope was probably a noun that later became the verb hope and then became the verb hoping. But the fact we got hoping from the verb hope does not mean that that's a big derivational change. So it was a little bit of a trick question. In summary, the difference between derivational morphemes and inflectional morphemes. Derivational morphemes significantly change the meaning of the word and or change the part of speech of the word. Inflectional morphemes don't do this. The part of speech stays the same and it doesn't really change the meaning of the word. Derivational morphemes are not required by syntax rules. Inflectional morphemes are. We looked at the S that we add to some verbs, right? He sings, she sings, it sings. But I say, I sing, you sing, we sing, and I don't add the S there. That's because syntax rules tell us we have to add the S. That's why that entire list of those 8 categories of inflectional morphemes, those are all rule-driven, syntax-driven rules in our language. Derivational morphemes are less productive. They apply to fewer words. If you go back and look at some of the derivational morphemes we've looked at, like mint, argument, full, beautiful, enable, able, right? Those are actually suffixes that don't apply to a large list of words in English. You might be able to think of, 20 words that use full at the end, but that's all you can think of. It's not hundreds and thousands of words, right? It's considered a small list and it's not considered applicable to that many words. Where if we look at the plural S, think of all the nouns in the world that I can add that plural S to. They are considered, those morphemes, those inflectional morphemes are considered more productive because I have thousands and thousands and thousands of words that I can use the plural S on. And that's just one of those 8 inflectional categories. Now, again, I want to remind you that inflectional morphemes can only be suffixes. Okay? If you see a prefix, I guarantee you it's a derivational morpheme. Okay? But now, not all suffixes are inflectional, so you need to use that list of our 8, that chart with those 8 inflectional suffixes in English to kind of guide your thinking. We've already discussed a lot of this in depth, but just to recap, derivational affixes can change the part of speech. And we see that with the verbs train, play, dance, work. If I add the suffix er, it turns the verbs into a noun, and that's a derivational process. Same with light, heavy, messy, friendly, those adjectives. When I add this suffix ness to it, lightness, heaviness, messiness, friendliness, it changes those adjectives into nouns. Again, with like us, nutritious, atrocious, felonious, harmonious, I can take nouns, and by adding that suffix, I can make them adjectives. Those are all examples of that derivational process where I'm significantly changing the meaning of the word and the part of speech. But keep in mind, not all suffixes, again, are going to do that because inflectional suffixes don't change the part of speech. And we see that with the words dreams, roads, knots. These are nouns that continue to be nouns even with the inflectional morpheme. Okay, that's all I'm going to teach you, but let's talk real quick about the relevance to teaching. Why in the world did you need to learn any of this, right? This is all very heavy linguistics, okay? And you're going to be teaching students, whether they're second language speakers or first language speakers. Why is this relevant? Well, it all comes back to reading and vocabulary development for your students. Let's start with this. What does this mean for you as a teacher? Well, inflectional morphemes, that table of 8 morphemes, those are the most common morphemes rather than derivational morphemes. And I said that on that summary slide, right? Our inflectional morphemes are more productive. They can apply to way many more words. With that said, when it comes to teaching, what do you teach first? Well, clearly, if you're going to teach these small units, you want to teach inflectional morphemes first because they're so applicable and productive. Okay, so that's going to guide your teaching a lot. And yes, you are going to be talking about morphemes with your students. You're not going to use that word, but your students are going to notice what are these random units on these words. And this is how it helps your students. Awareness of morphemes. So awareness of these small units of meaning within these larger words enhances their vocabulary development. So think about just understanding how to use the morpheme re and all the words that your students know. And now they have this morpheme re. Think about all the verbs they can attach that to you. Reuse, re-jump, replay, re-dance, re-give. There's so many ways to use that morpheme. So when you open up these small units to your students, they can double their vocabulary, right? This does so much to the English language. And it also enhances their reading awareness. So how they're able to understand text when they're reading. You will use this to help them analyze new vocabulary terms. So basically they're going to be reading, right? And they're going to come across a word they don't know. And you're going to discuss with them, well, what do you recognize in this word? Or what is new in this word that you don't recognize? And I want to use the word unlikable as an illustration for that. Like is the free morpheme in that word, unlikable. Like is probably one of the first 100 words they are going to learn when they learn the English language or when they're working with the English language. And in Spanish, there's going to be equivalents over there. They know the word like. They've been using the word like. But now they've come across it in reading and it says unlikable. You're going to ask them, well, what do you recognize in this word? And after some time, they're going to be like, well, I see the word like in here, right? Okay, well, what does like mean? See, you know what like means. Okay, but let's talk about what's happening at the beginning of this word and at the end of this word. Do you know any words that begin with un? And they might think of, well, undo. Okay, so what does un mean? And you use this to scaffold these larger meanings of terms. So yes, morphology and everything you've just learned is very relevant. You learned a lot of things you would never explicitly teach to your students, but you need to know this stuff so that you can help with the teaching side, so that you can be 10 steps ahead of your students when it comes to vocabulary and reading development when they're not there yet. So that wraps up this lecture. Let me introduce you to what I want you to do next. This will be the last exercise using these words, but now you're going to take a short exercise where you're going to look at some of these words and figure out whether it's an inflectional morphological change or a derivational morphological change, and come back to this PowerPoint for assistance, but it's just a quick 5-point exercise, and it's going to basically word the questions the same way that quiz 6 is going to word the questions. So you're going to get a practice at answering, get a practice at how to answer those types of questions before you actually take quiz 6. Okay, again, this wraps up our morphology lecture. Contact me if you have any questions, and I hope you guys are doing great. Bye.